This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone, Shalom Aleichem. We're Bruchim Abam to the Kollel Agra de Pirka Monday afternoon National Shiur. Welcome everybody. Before we begin, we have some important public servants announcements to make. Baruch Hashem, the new Sefer on Shemais is now available. It's arrived in America. You could get it at our site, rabbidg.com, with free shipping. This is what it looks like. So it's actually available. Also, if you want to get your Sefer on Chanukah, the light and the splendor, you could get it at artscroll.com or in better bookstores. Actually, you could get the Sefer and Shemais in Sfarim stores as well. And you could check out on our site, for those who haven't tried it out yet, we have a new venue called Torah Illuminated, where there is a shiur with an audio presentation with the Maramakoimos that are sort of come alive. You could sign up to that. So there are a lot of new and exciting venues in Talmud Torah. Today we're going to speak about Parshas Vayeishev, as well as Chanukah. When you read Parshas Vayeishev, what I would like to present to you today is, after you hear it, I hope the reaction is, yeah, of course, that's the simple reading of Parshas Vayeishev. But it might take some study and analysis until we arrive at that conclusion. Parshas Vayeishev speaks about the sale of Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef was 17 years old. He's a young man. He elicits the jealousy of his brothers. The brothers hate him. The brothers want to kill him. Ultimately, they sell him down to Mitzrayim. When he's in Mitzrayim, he is thrown in a dungeon. And he is the servant of Eshes Potiphera, and she tempts him, she tries to seduce him, and he overcomes a challenge. He's in jail, he interprets dreams, and next week he comes out of jail. So the primary subject of Parshas Vayeishev is the sale of Yosef. And unusually, surprisingly, as Yosef is going down to Mitzrayim, all of a sudden, stop! Time out! By the way, let's take a break over here. We have the story that Yehuda is demoted, and he goes to an Adulamite named Chira, and there Yehuda gets married, and he has 2 sons, and the 2 sons die, and one of their wives doesn't really want to wait around for his 3rd son, Shelah, and she masquerades as a Zoina, and Chazal say the Malach appointed over Taina, over Ta'ava, pushes Yehuda into it, and Yehuda ends up living with Tamar, and they have a child, and Zerach, and Paratz. And then after that story, okay, back to the regularly scheduled narrative. What is going on over here at Rabbi, where all of a sudden the Torah takes this left turn, and the Torah gives us, like, I don't know, it sounds like a commercial break. It sounds like in middle of the narrative, in middle of the story, we're talking about Yosef, and all of a sudden we interrupt to talk about what happened to Yehuda. What's going on over here? Why does this episode of Yehuda and Tamar interrupt the regularly scheduled story? Why is that interrupting in middle of Parshas Vayeishev? And if we study this, we'll see there's a very clear approach why these are not 2 independent subjects, but rather this is one seamless storyline. We know that the way the Rebbeinu Shalom operates, the mahalach of the hashgacha, is there's a concept that Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Maka Es Yisrael Elohim Kein Bara Refuah Tchila. The Gemara tells us in Megillah on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Achar Hadvarim Ha'ela, Gidal Hamelech Achashverosh Es Haman. And Rava said, after Hashem created the refuah to the Makkah, after Esther has been firmly entrenched and made queen of Persia, then and only then does HaKadosh Baruch Hu raise up Haman. The Amar Reish Lakish, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makeh Es Yisrael Elohim Kain Boirei Lahem Refuah Tchila. Like it says, Kerifi Li Yisrael V'nigla Avoin Ephraim. But for the nations of the world, it is not so. Hashem first smites them, and only then He creates the refuah. So the first question is, of what relevance, of what significance is it that God creates the refuah li Yisrael even before He brings the Makkah? Either way, one does not merit getting the refuah until after the Makkah. So if the person is not getting the refuah, if the refuah is not accessible until after the Makkah, of what relevance, of what significance is it that the Rebbeinu Shalom created it before? Right? You know, in other words, Pfizer, J&J, Moderna, they created the vaccine after the Makkah. Now, it's debatable whether it's a refuah after the Makkah or it's another Makkah after the Makkah. Like Chazal tells us, the reason why it says Verapa Yirape, because after the doctor heals you, you need a refuah from his refuah. By the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's Roifei Choyle Ama Yisrael. By the doctors, sometimes you need a bigger refuah from their refuah than from the Makkah itself. Sometimes the refuah of the doctor is a bigger choyli than the natural choyli. But in any event, of what significance is it that the Rebbeinu Shalom creates the refuah before the Makkah? And the Stipler writes in his Sefer Chaye Olam that the Yediyah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the refuah before the Makkah gives a person encouragement, idud, chizuk, because otherwise a person is in danger of falling into what we call a four-letter word. We don't like to say this word. It's a very dangerous word. The word is yush, hopelessness, despondency. Very often when a person has a difficulty or a challenge, whether it's in health, whether it's personal, whether in chinuch habanim, whether it's in shidduchim, where a person feels, you know what, this area of life, it's just not happening for me. It hasn't happened until now. No, I don't think it's going to work out. It's not going to happen. And a person is in danger of falling into yush. So when a person understands, no, there's no yush, ein kan yush, not only is there a refuah, the Rebbeinu Shalom created the refuah even before the Makkah. The refuah was created even before the Rebbeinu Shalom brought the difficulty. That gives a person a certain chizuk, a certain encouragement, where a person doesn't think it's hopeless, it's helpless. No, it's not helpless. The help has already been created. Now all I need to daven more. I need to be zoicha, to see the refuah, to see the Yeshua. But the Yeshua is there, it's been created. And the Stipler brings this out beautifully. By Hagar, it says she went and she strayed in the midbar, and the water depleted, and Yishmael was close to dying, and it looked hopeless. Where is she going to get water in a desert? Definitely her son's going to die. She even moved away. She said, Al Ereb b'mois hayeled. But as soon as the Rachamei Shamayim was aroused upon her, even though she wasn't deserving of it, what does it say? It doesn't say God created the water. It says Rebbeinu Shalom opened up her eyes and she saw the water. Vayifkach Elokim es einea. Now this is very interesting, by the way, because every home has the tzedakah Rameir Balanes, and I have on the back of mine Amar Rabbi Binyamin Hakol b'cheskas Sumin Ad Shakadosh Baruch Hu Meir Eseinea Min Hacha Vayifkach Elokim Eseineha Vatelech Vatemale Esachemes. There's no such pasuk. Vayifkach Elokim Eseineha Vatelech Vatemale Esachemes. It says Vayifkach Elokim Eseineha Vatera. She saw the water, but this is like the tzedakah has created this maxim that's not really a pasuk, but in any event, the Stipler points out, it doesn't say Hashem created the water. The water was always there. What the Rebbeinu Shalom did was Hashem opened up her eyes, because the Rebbeinu Shalom creates the refuah even before the makkah. All one has to do is one has to be zoichet to the refuah, zoichet to the Yeshua. Says the Stipler, it's the same thing with every mevucha or bilbul, every challenge in life, every confusion in life, every challenge, every difficulty, every hurdle. The answer, the solution is not something that has to be created. The solution was created before the Rebbeinu Shalom even brought the problem. If we're mechazik ourselves in Limud Torah and Avodas Hashem, will be zoicha to it. But this is the great method of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with which He deals with the Jewish people. That in HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makeh es Yisrael Elam Kain Boirei Lohem Refuah Tchila, and this should give us chizuk that Yeshua Kroiva Lavai. And if that's the case, then we have to utilize this mode of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and apply it to the greatest tzara and the greatest hurdle and the greatest challenge that ever happened to the Jewish people was Mitzrayim, was Yerida Mitzrayim. And therefore there is no question if the Rebbeinu Shalom sent us down to Mitzrayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom had to create the refuah before. So Marv Vayeishev, how did we get out of Mitzrayim? We got out of Mitzrayim at Kriyas Yamsuf. Why did the Yamsuf split? Chazal say, Malacha hayam kisanos. Ma ra hayam. Malacha hayam kisanos. Hayardein tisev le'achar. Chazal say, what did the sea see? Chazal say, the sea saw Aroyne Shel Yosef. Why did the sea split? Because of Aroyne Shel Yosef. The sea split because Hashem said, this man fled from his seducer, so you need to flee from Bnei Yisrael. It says, Vayeishev, Vayazov, Bigdav Yada, Vayonos. Since Yosef was Vayonos, so therefore, Malach Hayom Kisanos, the Yam was Tanos. The Yam fled. So if you want to know, how do we get out of Mitzrayim? We got out of Mitzrayim by Kriyas Yamsuf. Why were we zoichet to Kriyas Yamsuf? In the merit that Yosef ran away from Eishes Potiphera. So Marv Rabbi say, look how the Rebbeinu Shalom has created the refuah before the Makkah. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows he has to send the Jewish people down to Mitzrayim. But says Rebbeinu Shalom, before I do that, I got to figure out how I'm going to get you out. I'm going to get you out with Kriyas Yamsuf. But why will the sea split? The sea will split because Yosef ran away from Eishes Potiphera. So before I send the Jewish people down to Mitzrayim, first I'm going to send Yosef down to Mitzrayim. I'm going to seduce him and tempt him with Eishes Potiphera. Yosef's going to run away from her, and by running away from her, he's going to create the situation that we could get out of Mitzrayim. So let's imagine for a moment. Yosef has just been kidnapped, hijacked by terrorists, taken away from his dear father and Gadol Adar Yaakov Avinu. His world is coming crashing down. He gets to Egypt. What's the first thing that happens? He's seduced by his master's wife. He has to run away, and he's now in jail. And Yosef probably thinks the whole world is crashing down. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, no, you're making a big mistake. Your world is not coming crashing down. I just gave you the opportunity not to bring Klal Yisrael into bondage. I gave you the opportunity to get Klal Yisrael out of bondage. Yosef may have thought that the Rebbeinu Shalom is abandoning him and forsaking him. No, just the opposite. The Rebbeinu Shalom is grooming him for greatness, giving him the opportunity to overcome his seducer, Vayonos Hachutza, and in that merit, Hayam Ra Vayonos. I want to add on an amazing idea. This is an incredible Sfas Emes. It's worth the price of admission. We're going to, I'm just going to change the battery here. Okay, so the Sfas Emes writes, how was Yosef able to overcome Eishes Potiphera? What gave him the spiritual strength and the capacity to overcome her when she grabbed him by the clothing and he just let the clothing remain in her hands? The Sfas Emes writes on this week's Parsha, Shnas Tafresh Lamed Daled, 1874. Says the Sfas Emes, Yosef, by him being sold, and he was nisbaze by the Shvatim, and they tore off his garment. When the Shvatim tore off the garment of Yosef, what did Yosef say? Ma asa alekim li. Why is God doing this to me? Why is God letting this happen to me? Why is God abandoning me? No, Yosef had emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was not mahar achar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He believed it was hakol toiva. By Yosef allowing his garment to be stripped from him without questioning the ways of Hashem, a little bit later on, when Eishes Potiphera ripped off Yosef's clothing, Yosef said, hey, wait a second, I've been here before, been there, done that. This is not the first time I've had my clothing ripped off of me, and the first time I was able to pass the test. That endowed Yosef the spiritual capacity to overcome the challenge of Eishes Potiphera. So probably when Yosef had the brothers, when the brothers ripped off Yosef's clothing, Yosef's probably thinking to himself, why is God, Yosef, could have allowed himself to the luxury, he could have allowed himself to think, why is God doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? No. Yosef didn't question the ways of Hashem. That gave Yosef the wherewithal to overcome the challenge of Eishes Potiphera. And by overcoming the challenge of Eishes Potiphera, Mida keneged Mida, Klal Yisrael was Zoicha, that the Yamsuf split. So, everything that's taking place, the challenge of Yosef being sold, the challenge and the temptation of Eishes Potiphera, was only endowing Klal Yisrael with the merit to get out of Mitzrayim. What greater illustration of Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makes Yisrael Elohim Kein Boyer Lahem Refuah Tchila than Hashem sending Yosef down first, having his clothing ripped off of him, giving him the strength thereby to overcome the temptation of Eishes Potiphera. And then when Eishes Potiphera rips off his clothing, Yosef flees, he runs away, giving Klal Yisrael the merit that when they're at the Yam Suf, they could flee before the Yam. The Yam flees, Hayam Ra Vayanos. So this is all an example of Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makeh Es Yisrael Elohim Kain Boyer Elohem Refuah Tchila. Here's another example. We're going to read next week in Parshas Miketz. Yasef Aroiv Yavked Pekidim Al Haaretz V'Chimeishes Eretz Mitzrayim B'Sheva Shnei Hasava. Let Paroi make Pekidim and divide into fists the land of Mitzrayim. V'chimesh. The Chida in the Rosh David famously points out that V'chimesh is Rashi Tevais, Chodesh, Mila, and Shabbos. That Yosef instituted these mitzvahs in Mitzrayim. Yosef instituted Chodesh, Mila, and Shabbos. Now, why did Yosef institute specifically these three mitzvahs? By the way, these are the mitzvahs that the Yevanim tried to abolish. Why did Yosef abolish these? Why did Yosef institute these three mitzvahs? So the Chidah says there's something very special about these three mitzvahs. What these three mitzvahs teach and demonstrate is that we have a special connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. that we have a status of banim la'makom. Rosh Chodesh, the fact that we are Mekadesh, the Chodesh, that Bezdin proclaims the beginning of the new month, that indicates our special relationship with Hashem, that we are banim la'makom. Shabbos, really, how can we fulfill Shabbos? Shabbos is the day of rest of Hashem. Shabbos is the scepter of Hashem. If a regular citizen picks up the scepter of the king, that's like a rebellion. They're Morid b'malchus. So how do we have a right to observe the Shabbos? Shabbos demonstrates we're banim la'makom, we're children of Hashem. And while nobody could pick up the scepter of the king, only the king's son could in fact pick up his scepter. And then Milah, the Chidah quotes from the Zohar HaKadosh, Milah demonstrates that we are banim la'makom. Now, why was it so important for Yosef to establish that we are banim la'makom? Because, as the Chidah writes about in many, many places, we were supposed to be in Mitzrayim for how long? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarei. We were supposed to be in Mitzrayim for 430 years. But we weren't. The bondage only lasted for the short duration of 86 years. Why did God accept 86 years of bondage when we were supposed to be enslaved for 430 years? And the Chidah explains that because the bondage was so intense, Pari said, Tichbad ho'avoda al anoshim. It was such intense labor and bondage, God considered and reckoned the 86 years as if we did the full 430 years. So really we only did 1/5 of the time. 86 is 1/5 of 430. V'chimesh es eretz Mitzrayim. We only did 1/5 of the time. Why did we do 1/5? Because v'chimesh, Chodesh, Milah, and Shabbos. You see, if a master has a slave and the slave is being overworked, will the master let the slave out early? It depends what the relationship between the master and the slave is. If the slave is just a slave, why would the master let the slave out early? But if the slave is the master's child, then the master may make an accommodation for excessive and intense labor. Says the Chidah, Yosef needed to ensure that we would have the status of Hashem's children so that God would reckon that our intense labor of 86 years should be considered the full 430. This is what Yosef accomplished by establishing the mitzvahs of Chimesh, Chodesh, Milah, and Shabbos, to establish this strong connection of banim la'makom. And by doing so, Yosef allowed us to leave 1/5 early. By the way, instead of doing 430 years, we did 86. That means how many years did we leave early? We left Shemad, 344 years early. Shemad. The Chidah writes, that's why whenever there are decrees of the government against the Jewish people, and we're being persecuted, it's called Shemad, because it comes from the 344 years that we got out early. We extricated ourselves out of 344 years. So that we always label persecution against the Jewish people, Shmad, as a remez to those 344 years. Chidah even says that who takes us out of the 344? Who got us out early? Moshe. Moshe is Gematria 345. Someone who has the koach of 345, he could extricate us out of 344. Be it as it may, who got us out of Egypt early? Yosef. How? By instituting Chimesh, Chodesh, Milah, and Shabbos. So this is another example of Hashem creating the refuah before the Makkah. Hashem says, I got to get the Jewish people out. I got to figure out how they're going to get out before they even come down. So what does Rebbe Shalom do? He sends down Yosef. He gives Yosef the test of Eishes Potiphera. Now that Yosef flees Eishes Potiphera, Hashem says, great, the Yam will flee before Klal Yisrael. And not only that, I got to get them out early. How am I going to get them out early? I'm going to establish them as children to me. Who's going to establish that? Yosef. So before the Jews even go down, the Rebbe Shem has Yosef come down to put into place V'chimesh so that Klal Yisrael could come out early. And here's the real whopper. This is a gift from heaven, and it's Pashut also. By the way, there's another reason why we needed to have the status of children. Because the Medrash compares the exodus of Egypt to a kohen who has truma fell into a beis hakvaros. And the kohen has a dilemma. Okay, my truma is in the beis hakvaros. How am I going to get it out? The kohen has no choice but to get out his truma. So Hashem also says, I'm a kohen, but the Jewish people are in Egypt. They're in a makam of tumah. How am I going to get them out? Hashem says, I have no choice but to get them out. So the question is, why? Hashem could take us out with oisais and moifsim, and He doesn't have to come down into Mitzrayim and become tamei. It's interesting that the Chida writes, Tosfos asks that when Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu, what mikvah did He go to after He buried Moshe Rabbeinu? Because there's no mikvah in the world that would fit Hashem. Mimadad b'shalayim. Hashem would not fit into any mikvah. So how could Hashem be metame to Moshe Rabbeinu? So basically, Tosfos asks, when Hashem buried Moshe, how did he go to the mikvah? But Tosfos doesn't ask, how did he become tamei? Because we have a din of banim. So in order for Hashem to go down into Mitzrayim to get us out, you hear this? We didn't just have to have a status of banim for us to leave early. We had to have the status of banim to leave, period. Because if we don't have the status of being Hashem's children, He can't go down into Egypt and be metame to us. So in order to get us out, He had to send down Yosef to establish that we have the status of children so He could redeem us. Now, we have a concept throughout Chazal of 4 Golios. We have Bavel, we have Madai, we have Yavan, and we have Edom. And there's a big question that is raised, what about Mitzrayim? Is Mitzrayim not one of the Golios? Why is Mitzrayim not counted? So the Chida in Simchas Haregel, his commentary on the Haggadah, he brings that on the pasuk Ve'ela Shemais B'nei Yisrael Haba Mitzrayima, that when we came to Mitzrayim, we would have, had we been Zoicha, we would have done all 5 Golios in Mitzrayim. The word Habaim, Mitzrayima, Hey is 5 Golios, Beis is Bavel, Aleph is Edom, Yud is Yavan, Mem is Madai. Also, some say the word Mitzrayim is a remez to the 5 Golios. The Mem is Mitzrayim, Tzadi is Tzoila, reeds, that refers to Bavel. Reish is Roimi, Yud is Yavan, Mem is Madai. In fact, the Bnei Yissaschar in the Agar Dekala says, on the words Yamim Rabim, Rabim is Rashi Tevis Roimi, Bavel, Yavan, Madai. Or the Bnei Yissaschar says, Golos Mitzrayim is not included in the 4 Golios because it's koilel all the 4 Golios. He brings an idea that the 4 Golios are rooted in the 4 letters of Hashem's name, and Golos Mitzrayim is rooted in the Kutzoi Shel Yud, which encapsulates all of Hashem's 4 letters. And this expression Yamim Rabim we find many times. The Megala Amukos also makes reference to the fact that Rabim refers to the 4 Golios. alluded to in the word Rabim. Rabim is Roimi, Bavel, Yavan, Madai. So going down to Mitzrayim, friends, was not just going down to Egypt, but going down to Mitzrayim was really going down into all the Galuyos, including the current Galus of America, which is the darkest of all the Galuyos. You know, if we would have been Galus in France, then maybe we would have made it to Eretz Yisrael by now. If we would have been Galus in Yemen, we probably would have been in Israel by now. If we would have been in Morocco or in Iraq or in Iran, we may have made it out. At least not out of Galus, but out of Chutz La'aretz. But Galus America is a very, very dark Galus. You know why it's so dark? Because we don't even think we're in Galus. We think we're in paradise. We're so blinded that we think we're in a good place. But Rebbe Shem should watch over us, and Rebbe Shem should take us out. But when we went down to Mitzrayim, we weren't just going down to Egypt, we were going down into all the Galuyos. And if the way the Rebbe Shem operates is he always creates the refuah before the makkah, then it has to be that before we go down to Mitzrayim, God has to be creating the way to get out, not just of Mitzrayim. That we studied already. We saw that before we went down to Mitzrayim, Hashem sent Yosef, who had his garments torn off him, so that when he faced Eishes Potiphera, he would overcome that challenge, so that would create Kriyas Yamsuf, and Hashem allowed Yosef to go down first to establish that we would have the status of Banim, so we could get out earlier, we could get out period. But now we're learning that going down to Mitzrayim was going down into all four Galuyos. So it must be that before we go down to Mitzrayim, the Rebbe Shem must be creating the light of Mashiach. And that is exactly Parshas Vayeishev. And that's exactly what the Medrash tells us in many places. The Medrash says, Vayehi ba'is hahi. At that time when Yosef is going down to Mitzrayim, cut, time out, let's turn to the other direction. Rav Shmuel bar Nachman Pasach, Ki anoichi yadati es machshavos. Rebbe Shem says, I know all thoughts. I've got this under control. The Shvatim were busy selling Joseph. Joseph was wearing his sackcloth and his fasting. Ruvain was engaged in his sackcloth and fasting. Yaakov was engaged in his sackcloth and fasting. Yehuda was busy getting married, and the Rebbe Shem was oisek boirei oiroi shel melech HaMashiach. You know what the kavanah of the Medrash is? Yosef's going down to Mitzrayim. So it's not like the Torah is taking a time out and saying, by the way, okay, let me tell you some other story, and then we'll get back to the story of Yosef going down to Mitzrayim. No. This is the Darkei Shamayim, that before any Makkah comes to be, the Rebbe Shem first creates the refuah. So what's the refuah of going down to Mitzrayim? Yehuda gets married, and he has 2 sons, and he has a daughter-in-law, and then he lives with the daughter-in-law, and he has Peretz and Zarach that sets into motion the fruition of the Davidic dynasty of Malchus based David, which is the forerunner and the progenitor of Melech HaMashiach. Because if we're going down into Mitzrayim, we're about to go down, we're about to get there. Mitzrayim is the shoyresh of all the Galuyos. The Yud Kei Vav Kei are the 4 Galuyos. The Kutzah Shel Yud is Mitzrayim, that encompasses everything. So before we go down into Galus, the Rebbe Shem says, well, time out. First, before I send the Makkah, I have to create the refuah. Vayered Yehuda me'es echav. And we have the creation of the steps that brought into motion the Malchus Beis David and Mashiach Tzidkenu. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makeh Es Yisrael Elohim Kain Boirei Refuah Tchila. Look how beautiful Parshas Vayeishev is. Hashem sets everything into motion. Before you go down, I got to get you out. How are you going to get out Kriyas Yamsuf? How are you going to get Kriyas Yamsuf? Yosef has to overcome Eishes Potiphera. The only way he's going to do it is if the brothers rip his clothing off. So Yosef didn't allow himself to say, this is the low moment of my life. My clothing is being ripped off. I'm being kidnapped. Yosef had emunah that the Rebbeinu Shalom is making this happen. He's setting into motion Yeshuais v'nachamais lanu l'chal Yisrael. And not only Yosef, but then Hashem creates the Melech HaMashiach even before we go down into the first Galus. The Medrash tells us, Vayehi ba'isahi vayered Yehuda b'terem tachel yalada. Before even the first captor, the Pharaoh, was born, Hashem's already creating the Goy al-Achrain. By the way, the Medrash compares that everything that happened to Yosef happened to Tzion. Look at the beautiful words of the Medrash. Bayu re'eh kol tsarai she'ira li Yosef ira l'Tzion. It says by Yosef, Yisrael oav es Yosef. What does it say by Tzion? Oyev Hashem sharei Tzion. By Yosef it says, Vayisnu oisai. By Tzion it says, Nasna alai b'koila, al kein sinesia. By Yosef it says, V'hinei, anachnu ma'alumim alumim. By Tzion it says, Boy yavoi berina noisei alumoisav. By Yosef it says, Hamolech timloich aleinu. By Tzion it says, Oimer leTzion malach eloikayach. By Yosef it says, Vayach Chaloim Yosef Chaloim, I had a dream. By Tzion it says, B'shuv Hashem es shivas Tzion hayinu kil cholmim. By Yosef, Havoi novoi ani ve'imcha. Lehishtacha v'yislecha. By Tzion, Apayim eretz yishtachavu lach. By Yosef, Vayekanu b'yechav. By Tzion, Kinasi leTzion. By Yosef, Lech nara re'eh es shalom achecha b'Tzion v'darshu es shalom ha'ir. By Tzion, by Yosef, Vayiru oisai meirachaik. By Tzion, Zachru meirachaik es Hashem. And so on and so forth. And the Eitz Yosef explains that one of the commonalities between Yosef and Tzion is they both have the same numerical value of 156. 156, 6 times Yud Kei Vav Kei. So as we study Parshas Vayeishev, it should fill us with great chizuk and great hope when we read and we study that before even the Jewish people are sent down to Mitzrayim, Hashem is creating all the zuchusim necessary. The Rebbe is providing the opportunities necessary to get out of Mitzrayim. But not just the opportunities necessary to get out of Mitzrayim, the opportunities necessary to get out of all of the Gullus. Namely, Hashem is Yoshev v'oisek u'boirei oiroi shamelech hamashiach. So the episode of Vayered Yehuda is not a commercial break, chas v'shalom. It is a seamless illustration of the Darkei Shamayim, our Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Makes Yisrael, Elohim Kain, Boyer Lohem Refuah Techila. And this is all the Darkei Hashem. Before Hashem, Pfizer only came up with the vaccine if it does anything after the fact. The Rebbe Shalom created it before the fact, as he does with every trouble in life. And as the Stipler teaches, this should give us great chizuk, that nothing is helpless, nothing is hopeless, and Hashem should open up our eyes, that we should all be zoicha to see the Yeshuais that we're hoping for. Lanu ulechal Yisrael, Amen. So I wish everybody a wonderful day. Next Monday will be the first day of Chanukah, Be'ezus Hashem. So Monday we'll try to learn something about Chanukah. And I wish you all bracha v'atzlacha. Kol tov.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, kol tov, kol tov, kol tov.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Have a good day. Hi.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.